I think the first point is that when you talk about has been black box in the past, I think for a lot of retail it still is black box. And if you unpack the box a little bit, there are some very good brands and some very good retailers that are doing some very interesting work in their supply chains. But there's still nobody really that has any structured information beyond their tier 2 vendor base. So they might know who they buy from and they might know who they are buying from, but they don't know anything beyond that. So there's still a lot of information that isn't known. But you're absolutely right, and I think technology is the key to the transparency emergence. And if you look at the Generation Y, as people like to refer to them, they've never known a time when the internet didn't exist. So they're just used to going onto Google, typing in stuff and getting information, and that's their expectation. So I think if you're a brand owner, the risk you run is to not embrace this transparency culture. And now people are expecting far more substantiation around any kind of a claim that someone wants to make. And if you look at the claims that brands are increasingly trying to make, it's around things that are intrinsically rather hard to prove. So, there's a classic example of the single estate, shade-grown, bird-friendly, Colombian, organic, fair trade coffee. The only thing you can actually measure is the coffee bit. But people are really interested to know that all of the other things that they're very interested in as brand propositions are actually true. And so transparency plays a key part in substantiating many of these things that the consumers are particularly interested in when they're buying their products today. They might be assuming that previous behavior, from the brand has been sufficient to carry them through whatever might happen in the future. And we have examples of people who've had relatively catastrophic loss of brand value as a result of ignoring modern trends and technologies and failing to adapt to new business ways of doing business. The key to this is trust and understanding consumer trust. Consumers buy from brands because they trust them, and if you're in a more transparent world, then consumers expect to have more information available to them. So if you want to make claims around things like social and environmental and sustainability performance, then there's an expectation that there'll be some information available to substantiate those claims. And if you fail to make that information available, then you run the risk of losing some of that consumer trust. And typically, it's been found to be incredibly hard to get that back once it's gone. There was a very interesting piece, the BBC Wreath Lectures, a lady called Honora O'Neill did a whole piece on trust and transparency. And her central theme was that we have to be very careful about where we place our trust. We can't just blindly place our trust. That turns us into gullible fools. So what we have to do is we need better information to be able to trust, and we need information that we can judge, that we can verify in some way. What's interesting is that the information that's required to do the track and trace already exists in the supply chain. Farmers don't just deliver seed cotton to a gin and then walk away. There is a transaction that happens there, and there are details of that transaction that are kept. And that happens everywhere in the supply chain. So if we wanted to, we could walk through that supply chain and we could actually put all the pieces together, and we could understand for any given product, if we were given the task, we could go and over a period of time we could put the story together. So what's happening now is technologies are starting to evolve to allow that to happen in a much quicker way and a much more efficient way, so that this becomes an inbuilt capability of the supply chain to deliver traceability, because there's value in the ability to do so, to tell that story and to deliver transparency. So not only is it possible, but it's being done. Historic Futures were already tracking cotton for various brands, for various reasons, whether that's country of origin, whether it's organic, whether it's fair trade, better cotton. There's a whole number of things, and yes, it is where there's a will to do it, there's a way to do it. And we've seen a number of these things. We've seen in factories, we've seen improved right first time rates. So when their ability to hit the quality mark the first time round, and that's just because they have improved visibility into the product that they're working on. So they know that when they go and pull it from store, they're working on the same batch of product as they were working on before, so that in terms of things like dye shades and those kind of things, they can get those right the first time. So there are some real efficiency gains. We're getting those kind of feedback from not just from brands, but from suppliers, to say that as a result of having better visibility into the process, they can see where product is more quickly, they can understand where their inventory is, they can be more efficient, and so on. And I think the other point is that, you know, sustainability is increasingly on the radar of the you know, brands and retailers, and therefore the people that supply them. And they're really needing to be able to pull up information that allows them to address those kind of metrics that allow them to address the sustainability issue. So, you know, in terms of distance traveled, energy use, water footprint, those kind of things. You know, this is information that's going to become incredibly important, not just from a trust perspective, but from a, you know, a trade tariff point of view in the future. You know, the whole host of reasons why, you know, this kind of information is a real win for businesses, you know, pretty much right from the off. Last July, Walmart launched a range of jewelry called Love Earth, which is a new range of jewelry, and it was specifically about understanding the mine of origin to address exactly those issues about, you know, there's some concerns around how some of these metals are produced, how they're dug out of the ground. There's a good way of doing it, and there's a really not such a good way of doing it, and Walmart wanted to know that they were really only supporting the good way of doing it. So they needed a tracking system, so we've been working with them, and in July we launched this website. So now you can buy a piece of Love Earth jewelry. It has a batch code on it. You go to loveearthinfo.com, you type in your batch code for your piece of jewelry, and it'll tell you everything about how that jewelry was produced back to the mine of known origin. And if you think you know, if you think cotton's a challenge, we've also done diamonds for Walmart. So we have gold, silver, and diamonds. We've also worked on leather. We've worked on wool. We're being asked increasingly to start looking at wood and wood fibre. Sustainability issues in wood and wood fibre is obviously a, you know, pressing issue for a number of retailers and brands. So no, the technology is broadly applicable to stuff, so long as it's real stuff. If you think of our technology as more like online banking or maybe a Facebook for supply chains, so you have a private space that's only available to you and the people that you authorize to log into a specific account that allows you to manage information that's about how you run your business, whether you're a fabric mill in China or a yarn spinner in Turkey. When you then, within that space, you can model your processes and your production batches. So at the point at which you say, I have made some yarn, you go into your account and you can say, and I'm now sending it to you. The notification then is sent by email, but the information that you recorded in your account stays in your account. It's just that it's now able to be linked to, so that somebody else can pick that up and use that information to say, and I used that yarn to turn it into some fabric, and they record their information, and the whole information gets aggregated as it goes through the chain. And we also pick up things like GPS X and Y coordinates, so we know where on the planet all of these processes happened, and we can also take in information that isn't just process specific, but things like certificates. So if people have certification programs in place to say it's organic or it's fair trade or it's sustainable or etc., then that kind of information, supporting information, is also able to be made available through the system to the customer. You can interact with our technology with your mobile phone, both in terms of depositing information into the system for use by others, but also in terms of reviewing information to find out the history of a product. Compared to so many of the other initiatives that brands and suppliers and retailers engage in, then it's completely affordable. This is using modern contemporary techniques, using the internet and using efficient data exchange techniques to move information that already exists in the supply chain, around the supply chain, and aggregate it together so that the story is coherent and available at the point of the question being asked. It's really not a particularly expensive exercise to do. The only bit that's costly is the education piece that requires people to understand why they should be doing it, what they need to do, what records they need to keep. But actually delivering traceability is not only practical but completely affordable. MadeBy is specifically focused on improving practices in the clothing and apparel supply chain. And so they have the tools and the skills and the expertise to go in and help companies figure out what they should be doing. And we've been working with them, we've been partners with them for 3 or 4 years now to provide the tracking technology that they need to be able to bring all of that information together and serve it up to the consumer at the end of the day through the retailer. So all the MadeBy retailers have batch codes in the products that they're selling, and it's right next to the little blue button that MadeBy sews into all of their MadeBy products. You go to MadeBy's website, and using the batch code that's sewn into the garment, type that in, pick the brand that you're buying it from, and you'll be able to see a very people-based representation of the supply chain. So it's pulling information out of string. This information was deposited by the various organizations that make up the supply chain, and you'll be able to find out some quotes from the people who work there, understand where in the world they are, so you'll be able to go to the Google map and see that this organization was in India or in Turkey. and also look at things like certification. So there's a host of information that you'll have that gives you a genuine sense of who's involved in making the product, which you just can't get if you go and buy a product that isn't, that doesn't have traceability, that MadeBy haven't worked on. A lot of people ask me this question, do consumers really care? Do they bother look up this information even if we make it available to them on the web? And the answer is a relatively small proportion do of the consumer base. But there's a few things that we need to know. Firstly, those that do tend to be very motivated, tend to be well educated, tend to be well connected, tend to be media savvy. So they tend to have a very amplifying effect on whatever message it is that they're hearing. So if they're hearing a good message, they tend to amplify that message and say, here's a really good example of good practice. And equally, if they don't like it, they tend to be, quite harsh. So, the sheer numbers is perhaps, belied by the effect that they can have by use of the technologies that we've been talking about in terms of blogging and media interactions.